So we got a few things done on the truck since I saw you guys last week, or I guess you saw me. I like to get like a wire or a coat hanger or something like that and sort of mimic where the coolant lines need to run. Hopefully you've got a part store that'll let you walk around and sort of test fit those things until you find a hose that works, then you can cut off the links that you don't need. So I like having formed hoses on these radiator lines. I can't stand the look of those flexible ones that are just kind of universal, because it looks like you did a good job up to the 99-yard line and then you just sort of threw in the towel and gave up and just used whatever would work. This is a 4-inch elbow that was just on the shelf at O'Reilly. You can order these things on eBay or Amazon. Just type in 4-inch intake elbow. It even comes with these hose clamps, which you can spend as much on those as the part itself. So I think about 30 bucks for this elbow with the clamps. This is a K&N filter or 4-inch flange sitting on the shelf at the part store as well. These retail for like 65 bucks. Of course, I just left the wrapper on so a bunch of the shop dust doesn't settle on this oiled filter and it gets dirty before the engine even runs. The centerpiece is a 4-inch exhaust pipe. So I went down to our local shop. It was the guy that did the exhaust on our square body build. I think he charged me 20 bucks to cut me off like a 16 or 17-inch section of that, and then I adjusted it as needed. So for roughly 120 bucks, I've got this cold air intake that fits great in our truck, which is less than half the price of buying one of those kits that are made from rotiformed plastic or steel or whatever. I just used a piece of 16 gauge sheet metal to make a mount on this, and once we get the fenders removed and coated and everything like they should be in the radiator support, I'll just fasten this up against this portion of it where we need it to be, so we don't let that thing rub on the coating on our inner fenders. We bought this JLT catch can assembly while we were at Summit, picked up this radiator down in Texas a month or so ago. And it comes with the quick connect fittings that fasten right onto the factory valve cover vent tubes, and has really nice color instructions just to show you which side to hook those to, and you can cut the hose to length. The thing's not cheap, but it's a really nice piece of aluminum, and it's anodized black. Like I said, comes with the fittings. And I've got room to just unscrew the bottom of it and pour the oil out that it captures from the engine ventilation. Quick update on the inside. We're starting to wire our air conditioning system. Man, does it sound way different in here to you guys too? I keep saying that, don't I? My daughter had this great idea because the vents that RestoMod sends are 4 of these round ones, and even putting 2 of them side by side looks awful right here, and we'd have to come up with a way to split the vent. So, simple solution, she said, too bad you don't have like a square one or a rectangle one that can sit there. Oddly enough, I get on Amazon, I ordered one of these, and it's actually from Old Air Products. And you can take that 2-inch hose and squeeze it down to this oval. I've already removed the center section out of it so I can get through here and easily fasten it to the bottom side of the dash. Good call on her part. I showed you guys this problem last week, which we could raise the truck up and roll these fenders and we'd have the clearance that we need. But I like the stance of the truck the way it sits like that, and I want to have that tucked. So in about 4 working days, we got our package from Fat Man Fabrications. And as you guys know, in the COVID times, that's pretty awesome. We also got the last piece we need for our air conditioner system, which I hope that's what's in here. Yep, that's not the most interesting thing. This is. Oh, nice magazine, super heavy. Cool. Packing list, instructions. Oh, nice photo instructions, clearly written. So we're going to have to cut 3/4 of an inch off the inner and the outer tie rod end. That way we can keep full adjustment with our suspension being an inch shorter on each side. And they give us a little more instructions on that, and kind of helping us get mixed up because the right and the left hand are kind of hard to determine on these control arms. So let's take a look. Well, that's impressive. These are extremely heavy. This is DOM, and that's TIG welded. Got new bushings on each side, new grade 5 bolts on each side with nylon locking nuts. Honestly, that's really impressive. You just don't see that anymore. And a greasable ball joint has already been pressed in, and a nice Sims nut that's nylon locking as well on the bottom. So there's a lot of value there that these are not only heavy built, but give you all the hardware. And we're starting out life with the new serviceable ball joint on both these uppers. There's the lower control arms. This would be the passenger side. Got bushings inserted, hardware's already here. Looks like they're giving us a new nut for the back of this as well. See, they welded this solid end piece here. Golly, these are heavy. They look great. Now there's two mounting points like they listed on their website. One is for a stock ride height and one is for a lowered ride height, which I think this will change it about 1.5 inches, keeping in mind like the angle geometry makes a difference, even if the holes aren't that far spaced apart. Which with our coilovers, we'll run them in the stock location because we can adjust our height as we like it. And there's a nice heavy 90-degree zerk in this serviceable ball joint. So again, all the hardware you need, new bushings, new ball joint, super heavy material, and really well fabricated. I know these are expensive, but I don't mind it when it's quality parts like this that are well thought out, and they had them in stock ready to ship. So there's also a value there to a company that's invested in keeping inventory, so they make my life easier when I place an order. So the next thing we need to do is mark all of our AC lines like we talked about last week, get them off of the truck so we can have those ends crimped on, and then start stripping the front end off the truck so we can tear the suspension down. And with the magic of editing, there's the hoses ready to go to get crimped on. Condenser and radiator are in the bed of the truck. Front end is off, ready to start tearing the suspension down. I removed the hardware from these control arms and I've got them sanded and cleaned up. I'm going to go ahead and start taping them up to paint, which, as you guys know, is something I'll rarely ever do before test fitting these parts. But I have a really good feeling that if they send this many kits out that they'll probably fit just fine. So I'm going to go ahead, while I'm tearing the front suspension apart and taking the factory stuff off, be painting these and going through multiple coats, giving it plenty of time to dry. And then tomorrow I can come out here and start bolting it together. So this was an issue I thought we would have just looking at the geometry of the suspension, and it turns out we certainly have this issue. If you narrow this front suspension, there's not going to be room for this sway bar to fit behind the spindle. And I checked the website, and under these specific arms, it makes no mention of your sway bar or end links not working out. Neither does the papers that come in the box with these control arms. So I figured out what the fix is going to be for it. Instead of having it bolt from the outside in, you need it to bolt from the inside out and then work into the spindle. What I've done is cut the sway bar link in half and then ground it at an angle so we can get plenty of weld in here, because I'm not interested in how pretty it is, I'm interested in how strong it is. And by doing this method, I can bolt it in both from the outside and we'll have the clearance we need. We're going to start with the lower control arm. Now I know what you're thinking. I thought he said he was painting these. Well, I did. I actually painted them in satin clear so they weren't too shiny. Before you go to the next step, make sure and take these rear lower control arm brackets off, because you're going to need this to basically be free so you can get the front mount wedged up inside your Crown Vic subframe. Probably a good idea to put a little bit of your grease or lubricant or something on this before you get it mounted. That looks like urethane, and in my experience, urethane is the noisiest, squeakiest material known to man. I have a couple of things about hardware. While they do supply bolts and they're already threaded in the upper control arms, they don't necessarily work in this application. The holes in these are not big enough to run these bolts through, and they actually need to be ran from the inside out, so you can just put the nuts on the outside. And the instructions say to reuse the factory hardware, so I'm not sure why they give us these, but thanks, I guess. I do use the lower bolt that they sent for this lower control arm, and go ahead and send it through the back. It gets to be such a pain in the butt with these Crown Vic front suspensions. You have to pull this front rack out of the way for almost any servicing of stuff like this. And in order to do that, you've got to take this front bolt out so you can move the rack, and it's just kind of a nightmare. So run this bolt through on the back side so the nut's on the front, and you never have to pull the rack off to do anything service-wise from there on out. You're going to want to supply your own washers for this front lower control arm bolt, and I have some that just center it in these veins. Those are slotted for adjustment in there, but from the factory, the hardware that they send basically just centers this bolt in the opening and doesn't allow for any movement. This hardware started. Now we can run this nut up on the back side. Tell when the pitch of your impact changes, or when you watch it make contact in the front and start to compress the rubber inside this rear bushing. For now, I'll go ahead and tighten these lower mount bolts. It'll be up to our alignment to get them set exactly where they need to live. I guess the pro tip on this install is make sure you always put the hardware like on these ball joints while you're doing all your fitment and testing. Otherwise, something could happen where you beat the threads up and it makes it really difficult to start these on. So I just made a mark with that blue Sharpie, and then now I know I have 2 more threads above that before we reach that bottom set nut. And by doing so, kind of gives me an idea when we put it back on the ground how far exactly 2 of those threads will raise the truck back up. If everything works out perfectly, it'll sit a little bit high when we first set this front end back on it, but by the time we do the hood and the coolant and get everything at full weight, it'll be just right. Now Fat Man Fabs sends this hardware and these bushings, which aren't going to be enough to space between these mounts and the shocks that we have. Luckily, I have bushings left over from what came with these Viking coilovers, and I can put washers and stack in there. It's not critical, it's not going to be taking a lot of load side to side, but it just needs to keep it from sliding and creating slop while it's being cycled. Now for the upper control arms, like I mentioned in the instructions, reuse this hardware. But you can't really put the hardware in place until the control arm is in place. I can tighten the upper shock mounts. Alright, time for a spindle. You run run these by hand as far as they'll let you until the ball joint starts to spin, if it starts to spin. And then there's a place for an Allen key to go in the bottom of that. And you can use an end wrench and an Allen key to hold the center. It seems like these are going to tighten up without moving, and that's good. One less thing we have to deal with. If you're doing this project yourself, you'll notice once you tighten these ball joints, it's really difficult to turn this spindle this direction. And I think it's because the geometry with an unloaded suspension is trying to force that upper A-arm to come up when you make that rotation. It's not the end of the world. It should be fine once there's weight on it. Just thought if you guys are doing it too, I had the same problem. Here's a little better angle to show you guys that problem with the sway bar link. You can see there's no way this could have been on this side of that sway bar. It would have made contact with what I think is probably the wheel speed sensor that came from the factory here, which we have ours disconnected in this application. But now that we've done this modification to the end link, we can start it in on the top and then bring it in here, and when we tighten those up, that's where it'll live. And even if it's close, these will stay the same relationship the entire suspension travels. Essentially, that's the fix you're going to need to do if you're running these control arms on the Crown Vic. So it's all buttoned up now. Highly recommend you go over and touch like every fastener when you finish a project like this, especially since it touches brakes and suspension and steering. The finish turned out great on these with that satin clear, and it's just something I think I picked up at Ace Hardware. The other side's all finished too. So if I had a complaint at all, it would be that not only do the sway bar links need to be changed, and there's nothing that the Fat Man Fabrications could have done about that, except make it known to the consumer that you may need some fabrication on those. Not everyone has a welder sitting in their garage that they can cut and turn those around and re-weld them. Or potentially just add those to the instruction manual to say, hey, this is what we recommend as a repair. Find a welder that's, I don't know, got some kind of certification to know what they weld is going to hold. Otherwise, make some different sway bar links in-house. I mean, for $1,150, you send a good product, you might as well tell the full story of what it takes. So we get this front end put back on, and you guys can see exactly how much we gain for tire clearance. And just like that, front end's back on. And an inch seems to be more than enough clearance. So we'll turn the wheel all the way to the lock back and forth, and we didn't have any interference. So I think that's the right move. Yeah. Now keeping in mind, we still have the weight of the hood, the radiator to go back in, the condenser, the front bumper, plus the coolant in the radiator, so maybe 100 pounds, which will bring that down maybe a 1/4 inch, 3/8, something like that. So I think the money we spent here, well spent, because now our wheel choices are kind of limitless if we were ever to decide to change. Plus, I guess the benefit, we get to keep the ones we already bought. So that's it for this week. Now we're gonna take the front end back off and start doing rust repair, so it'll go on for the last time the next time. Thanks for watching.